Welcome to our weekly market review brought to you by ETM Analytics and TreasuryONE. As always, I'm joined by TreasuryONE's currency strategist, Andre Sillier. The big news last week, of course, was the interest rate announcements, or the lack thereof, actually. And as this uncertainty Trump train continues to barrel down, with the US still like one eye open on whether or not they're going to miss that recession finally. It was actually no surprise that both central banks, that's the SARB and the Fed, decided to pull up the handbrake when it comes to the interest rate cutting cycle. Of course, the focus now shifts to the US's economic outlook, and it's not looking all that rosy.
Yes, good afternoon. If we look at the Federal Reserve and the South African Reserve Bank not changing interest rates, an interesting one. On the Federal Reserve side, they less concerned with the growth perspectives. That doesn't look as good. Didn't say too much about that. To me, the most interesting one was that they saw their inflation in an upward trajectory because of tariffs and so forth. The SARB, on the other end, concerned about what happens in America. I recall that Mr. Kanyahu at one stage had said he's not following America, especially when they cut by 50 points and he only by 25 basis points. But they lowered their inflation expectations for 2025. So now you would think that if you lower your expectations for inflation, that you could actually cut interest rates. But that's not what happened, because he's not following America, but he's closely watching what happens in America with tariffs and the policies of Trump and the impact of that on the world economy. So whether you like it or not, what happens in South Africa is dictated a lot and hinges a lot on what happens in America and what is the influence of what happens in America with tariffs and their economic outlook on the world, because that's got an impact on South Africa. So you don't have to follow them, but you have to watch them closely. So no interest rate cuts. And to me, yes, the Federal Reserve, there is still the expectancy that they could go for 2 cuts this year, maybe even 3 is what the markets are telling us. I think interest rates is going to be stable for the year throughout both South Africa and America. I don't think there's too many changes, because I said this before. The man was voted in for 4 years, and he's not going to change his personality. He's not going to change his erraticness, and we're going to live with it for 4 years. So I think this year is where the monetary policy side prefer a stable outlook going through the year to see how things play out.
Yeah, and this could also force the Fed to perhaps ease or even pull back on their quantitative tightening that they've been busy with since the stimulus measures post-pandemic. And, you know, to be honest, we've been calling for some form of downturn in the US economic performance for a number of months now as we see the business cycle turning. It just feels like that business cycle is very protracted. That downturn has become very protracted. And so these recessionary fears, there's a number of red flags. So they very might well end up in the red there, as you can see there, that graph on the right-hand side. So, you know, perhaps reason for caution. And then you have a Trump, because this all started way before Trump was ever entered into the White House, the downturn in the business cycle. So he's just really come and stepped on the gas and perhaps just have sped up a quicker downturn in the economic data. So we'll keep on following that. And speaking of US economic data, PCE quarter-flated this out this week. And as you mentioned, you know, the inflation outlook and the US expecting a slight uptick there.
Absolutely. I mean, but that's as expected. We're all calling for that. Everybody's calling for that. And it's expected to come out that way. But it's interesting that, as you mentioned, they might very well go into the red on that growth forecast. But we all know how economic cycles work. It doesn't happen overnight. So Trump will just be the one that gets blamed for the recession. His policies will be blamed for the recession, although it started well before him. It's just part of a cycle that we will go through. But he will be blamed, just like during election campaigns, they always find somebody to blame for something. He will be blamed for a recession. Exactly. It would not be entirely his fault.
You mentioned earlier that South Africa takes its cue almost from the US. Is that the same for the Rand? Where are we heading this week?
Very much the same thing. If we look at where the Rand is trading, if we look at the cross rates and everything, it is following the path of the dollar mostly. And so what happens on the dollar value against all other major currencies and against emerging markets is where the Rand takes its cue from and follows that trend. Sometimes a little bit too much, sometimes a little bit too less, but it follows that trend and firmly stuck into this 18-19 range, which I believe it's not going to break out of very soon. We need either a break below the 108 down to 106 to see a Rand moving towards the 19, closer to those levels, and we need to break a 110, in my opinion, to really see a Rand breaking below 18 significantly. So we're stuck in those ranges, and we need a catalyst, as that clearly says here on the graph, something tangible that we can almost see and put together and say, this is the reason. There's now a figure, 10 figures that came out indicating this or that. Unless that doesn't come out, or a stoppage to a war or something, but you need...
Or just like the GNU agreeing on a budget, I suppose.
Yeah, well, that one I don't want to even address because...
Then let's not.
Let's just stick to that one where I said we have a budget. We had a budget speech. We're still waiting to see whether we have a budget.
Of course, we're ending to, Trump has been very quiet this past weekend, economically speaking, tariff speaking, but we are heading towards that April deadline. What is your views on that? Can we expect some sort of bump? Because I think that's next week it kicks in, right?
That could very well be the catalyst that we're waiting for. Because the 2nd of April, and we know about these tariffs against China, Mexico, and Canada, and so forth, implemented, reversed, and then said 2nd of April, they will be finished with the analysis of all their trading counterparts. And then they will announce tariffs broadly across all their trading counterparts, of which South Africa is one. So that could be very well the catalyst that we're waiting for to see a change in the value of the dollar and a change in ranges that we're going to call for the Rand to trade within.
Okay, let's see if Mr. Trump doesn't dish up anything before then. Andre, thank you very much. We will chat again next week.
Thank you.